All right, for more on the NSA reforms, let's speak to our correspondent Daniel Ranches in Washington, D.C. Hello, Daniel. The moves are more sweeping than many U.S. officials had been anticipating, yeah? So tell us more about that.
They are more sweeping, but they're also very general. So he's announced a lot of new initiatives and on lots of different areas, but the language is very general. And in order to analyze and assess whether this will have teeth in terms of some of the public concerns, depends on how that whole program is rolled out. And of course, again, that comes down to a little bit towards public trust. Just to unveil some of the proposals that you've already mentioned and go into a little bit more detail. One of the prime areas is the bulk collection of phone data of Americans. They are trying to find a way in which the public will be convinced that the NSA and other intelligence agencies don't just have all of that data available to them at any time. They've already given that reassurance, but the fact that physically all that data is in the hands of the NSA has been seen as a problem by those reviewing national security over the last few months. So they want to either get the telephone companies to hold that data or an independent body. Trouble is, the phone companies don't want to do that job. There is no independent body, so I think that's why you've got this 60-day period when they'll come up with some kind of a way of distancing the NSA from the actual collection of this data and then putting a wall in between the two, and that wall is a court and the ability of an NSA operative to then go to that court and say, we have a specific national security, counter-terrorism reason, or whatever it is, that we need to dip into those phone records. So that's one of the specific things. The other thing is general public representation at the FISA court. This is the court that decides whether they have the justification to go into those records. And there will be an annual review of whether something has been in the public interest, certain cases that might have come up. But again, if this is all in general terms, it's not going to be much use to the public. So it remains to be seen how much teeth this will have.
Daniel, despite, like you've mentioned, the newest information is a little bit general, but the announcement indeed follows global anger of the Snowden's leak. So do you think the overhaul plan will be sufficient to satisfy critics around the world over the reach of the US surveillance programs?
I think critics will say this is an opportunity to address some of those issues, but certainly not all of them. And the fact remains that there are multiple ways in which the American intelligence organizations have been able to access the emails, text messages we learned today, the contacts